What if I told you that the CIA and Canada were involved in something even more mysterious than MK Ultra? The code name was Subproject 68, and it was part of what's called the Montreal Experiments. Put on your seatbelt because I'm about to introduce you to the world of psychic driving. You might be familiar with the names of Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, but today I want to talk to you about Donald Ewan Cameron. This is the doctor behind psychic driving. This was a project where they would take people that checked themselves into these clinics in Canada for depression, postpartum depression, even signs of schizophrenia. The concept here is that they would put these people into a drug-induced coma, and they would subject them to 16 hours a day of recorded quotes or sentences. Sometimes they would subject them to what you've seen in A Clockwork Orange. They would literally fix their eyes so they could not be shut, and they would play over and over for 10 to 16 hours a day videotape of repeated phrases. The big idea was that they believed that they could break down the psyche of a human being to the point of being like a toddler and then build them back up, thus getting rid of any depressive disorders or schizophrenia disorders. One of the victims, named Jean Steele, her daughter was actually able to get payment from the Canadian government for damages that were done that were permanent. Put yourself in her shoes. You check into an institution because you're dealing with postpartum depression. You're looking for help. And what do? They treat you like an experiment. For the next 6 weeks, she was subjected to constant repetition of videotape. And also when she was asleep, the pillows were loaded with speakers, so it would be a sentence over and over again, tens of thousands of times. They would then put them into a drug-induced coma. They would use LSD and other chemicals of the time. This would destroy memories. It would stop the hippocampus from functioning correctly. And after 6 weeks of this treatment, when she was released, she had completely forgotten who she was, didn't know who her family was. Almost every one of her memories for the previous 40 plus years were gone. She had to relearn how to walk. She had to relearn how to hold in her urine. And she had to relearn how to speak correctly. The subcategory under the header of psychic driving was called Depatterning. They believed this would accelerate therapeutic reorganization. In other words, they believed that as you were broken down and relearning things, these different pieces that would cause severe depression or even schizophrenia would somehow be lost in the mix. And at times, it worked, but it worked in a way that they never expected. Because gone were the episodes of anxiousness, gone were the episodes of schizophrenia, and gone were the episodes of persistent depression disorder. But it left the subject the mental capacity of a toddler. Then what they found is if they kept them long enough, and we're talking a couple of months, they could literally reprogram a human being and rebuild them completely to the wishes of the experimenter. This would happen in 3 stages, and in the first stage, the patient would have severe memory loss. They were still aware that they were in a hospital, they could see that there were doctors and nurses, and they knew what they were, and they could even recognize family members, but many of the memories were becoming cloudy. By the second stage, the patient would have lost all sense of what is called spatial and temporal understanding. This is where they would say things like, "Where am I?" or "How did I get here?" And in the second stage, they would begin showing a degradation of basic motor skills. Unfortunately, toward the end of the second stage and the beginning of the third stage, they would begin to experience incontinence. By the third stage, all of the original delusional ideas of anyone with schizophrenia or any type of cognitive disorders, they would begin to disappear, along with memories, along with motor functions, and along with all forms of cognitive awareness that are attached to memory. And according to the Canadian Medical Association Journal, first entry being in 1958, the patient would become what they call a blank slate. Again, all delusions, all hallucinations, all forms of schizophrenia were gone. But so were virtually all other forms of mental cognition. But what wasn't shared immediately with the families was the overuse of LSD and another chemical called chlorpromazine. And these would work in tandem with repeated electroshock therapy. So at this point, you've got a blank slate person with the mental capacity of a toddler, and this is where they would begin what they would call the phase of rehabilitation. During this phase, they were reintroduced to family members, and they were reintroduced to reading. They were reintroduced how to walk correctly. But at any time, if any form of hallucination or any of the schizophrenic tendencies that used to be there came back, they would immediately go back to the overdoses of chemicals and electroshock therapy. After about a month of this rehabilitation, the patient would be given back to the family. They would be released and discharged, and they would follow up every couple weeks. And during the follow-ups, they would do a mild form of the electroshock therapy. And the official tagline that was given to this as an explanation when the entire experimentation part was over was this: recovery exists not in the repair of damaged aspects of the individual's personality, but in what's called rearrangement. Needless to say, psychic driving and depatterning was brought to a halt in the 1970s, and since then, over 300 families have petitioned the Canadian government for retribution and for payment, many of which were given out-of-court settlements. If you know of any other strange things like this that have happened that the government has done that maybe no one knows about, put it in the comments section. I would love to see what you know about the subject.